Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I have to be honest with you. Usually when we pick up a stack of research or a new book, I get this real sense of excitement. Like, oh, we're going to learn about space travel, or we're going to figure out the history of coffee or something.
Right, yeah. It's usually an adventure.
Exactly. But today felt really different. I spent the last few days going through this stack of notes and Jamie V. Thornberry's new book, Bones of Being, The Architecture of Human Dignity. And I didn't just feel excited. I felt unsettled.
Yeah, unsettled is definitely the right word. I think haunted might actually be the word I would use.
Haunted works, because we aren't talking about a specific historical event today or some new piece of technology. We are talking about something that feels like it's just humming in the background of everything.
Every single day.
Right. Every news headline you read, every debate we have about healthcare, every argument about laws or rights. It's like the floorboards of Western civilization are creaking, and we're trying to figure out if the house is actually collapsing.
That is the exact metaphor Thornberry uses, isn't it? He calls this current era the age of unmaking. And honestly, when you first read that phrase, the age of unmaking, it sounds a little, I don't know, dramatic, like a movie trailer.
It totally does, in a world where nothing makes sense.
Exactly. But then you get into his introduction and you realize he's not being dramatic at all. He's just being descriptive. He starts with this concept that we are essentially living on borrowed meaning.
I circled that phrase like 3 times in my notes. Borrowed meaning. Let's unpack that right off the bat, because I feel like it sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about. What exactly does he mean by that?
Think about it like a trust fund. Or maybe a line of credit is a better way to look at it. Western civilization, so our laws, our human rights, our general ideas about fairness and justice, was built on a very specific moral capital. It was built on a very specific idea of what a human being actually is.
The why. Like, why do we matter in the first place?
Right. We used to have this shared vocabulary. We used words like dignity, duty, personhood, sacredness. And even if people weren't religious, there was this cultural residue that basically said, human beings are special, and there are just certain lines you do not cross.
Yeah.
Thornberry's argument is that we have completely spent that capital. We are still using the words. We still talk about human rights all the time. But we've lost the underlying definition of human that made those rights make sense to begin with.
So we're basically writing checks that our cultural bank account can't cover anymore.
Precisely. And the symptoms are what you see when you just scroll through your phone on any given Tuesday.
It's everywhere.
It really is. You see debates about infants born alive after failed abortions and people literally arguing about whether they have rights. You see state-sanctioned death euthanasia being offered to people who aren't even dying but are just lonely or depressed.
Yeah, the loneliness aspect is huge. We're going to get into that.
And you see commercial surrogacy markets where babies are essentially commissioned like pieces of custom artwork.
And that brings us to the core question of the book, and really the entire mission of this deep dive for you listening. It's a question that sounds incredibly simple on the surface, but clearly isn't. What is a human being, and who gets to decide?
That is the precipice. That's the edge of the cliff right there. And before we dive into the heavy philosophy of it all, I think we should talk about the author for a second, Jamie V. Thornberry. Because he isn't just some guy in a tweed jacket sitting in an ivory tower theorizing about moral frameworks.
No, and that's exactly what grounds this whole topic for me. He has this really fascinating background. He's done extensive work in prisons. He's worked directly with the most marginalized people in society.
Right. He has seen the absolute margins. He's not writing about human dignity from a luxury resort. He's writing about it from the perspective of places where dignity is usually stripped away entirely.
Yeah, his voice has this really intense moral gravity to it.
It does. So when he talks about the unmaking of civilization, he's speaking from the front lines. He's pointing out that we have made a swap, a massive fundamental swap in the basic operating system of the West.
Okay, let's get into that swap, because this is the mission of our deep dive today. We need to understand what exactly changed. Thornberry argues that we traded inherent dignity for something he calls radical autonomy.
And I want to be really careful here right away, because autonomy is a word we generally like.
I love autonomy. I want to choose my coffee in the morning. I want to choose where I live. I want to choose my career path. It sounds like a purely good thing.
And it is a good thing in a specific context. But Thornberry is arguing that we've taken a good thing and we've made it the only thing. And when you make it the only thing, it sort of eats everything else.
Okay, so let's break down the two sides of this swap. In the red corner, we have the old framework inherent dignity. Now, we use the word dignity a lot in everyday life. Treat me with dignity. But what does it actually mean in this philosophical context?
In the context of the book, and really in the context of our legal history, inherent dignity means that your worth is completely unconditional. It is tied entirely to your nature. You are a member of the human family, therefore you have infinite value. Period.
No asterisks.
No asterisks whatsoever. It's not about your IQ. It's not about whether you can walk or talk or feed yourself. It's not about whether you pay taxes or contribute to the GDP. It's not even about whether you are a good person or a convicted criminal.
Wow.
Yeah, it precedes all of that. You matter simply because you are.
You matter because you are. So it's an ontological status. It's built into the hardware of being human.
Exactly. This is what the philosopher Charles Taylor calls the social imaginary. It's the water we used to swim in without even realizing it. Think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights right after World War II.
Right.
The world had just seen the Holocaust. They had seen exactly what happens when a state decides that some humans matter and other humans don't. So they came together and said, we have to agree that every single human has inherent dignity.
And it's fascinating because they didn't necessarily agree on why, right? Yeah. You had Catholics, secularists, Muslims, communists, all at the table.
Right. They had totally different worldviews. Jacques Maritain, who was heavily involved in drafting it, famously said something like, we agree on these rights providing we are not asked why, but the core agreement was solid. Dignity is inherent. It's not a gift from the government that can be taken away.
Okay, so that is the old framework.
Yeah.
Inherent, unconditional worth. Now, let's look at the blue corner, the challenger. Radical autonomy. How is this different from just everyday freedom?
This is where we have to get just a little bit technical, but stay with me because it explains so much of modern life. Thornberry makes a crucial distinction between Kantian autonomy and modern or radical autonomy.
Kantian, meaning Immanuel Kant, the 18th century philosopher.
Yes. For Kant, autonomy was deeply tied to moral responsibility. It was the freedom to do what you ought to do. It was freedom within an existing moral order. You are free to choose the good.
So it's kind of like you're free to drive the car anywhere you want, but you still have to follow the rules of the road, and you can't just run over pedestrians.
That is a perfect analogy. You have agency, but reality is still reality. There is a good that exists outside of your own head. Radical autonomy, the new framework, completely flips that. It says freedom is actually freedom from any moral order.
Freedom from the rules of the road entirely.
Freedom to decide what a road even is. Under radical autonomy, the individual defines reality. Self-definition and self-direction are the highest possible goods. If I choose it, it is good. If I don't choose it, it is bad. My personal will is the ultimate moral authority.
This sounds a whole lot like expressive individualism. I saw that term pop up in Chapter 2. It sounds like an elective you'd take at an art school, but it's actually a pretty heavy philosophy.
It is. And again, this goes back to Charles Taylor's work. Expressive individualism is the idea that the real you is hidden deep inside. Your main job in life is to dig inside, find that unique nugget of authenticity, and then express it out to the world.
And the world's job is just to applaud.
Exactly. Notice the pronoun shift in how we talk today. It's no longer the truth. It's my truth.
Live your truth. Speak your truth. You hear that everywhere.
Right. And if truth is entirely subjective, then my personal preferences essentially become my morality.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Why is this necessarily bad? It feels very empowering. It feels nice to say, hey, I define who I am. You don't get to put a label on me. Why does Thornberry see this as the unmaking of society?
Because if you take that philosophy to its logical conclusion, you lose the ability to have a shared world. Thornberry calls this the loss of common moral grammar.
Right.
If my truth says that a certain action is morally good, and your truth says it's morally bad, how do we adjudicate that as a society?
We shout at each other on social media.
Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We get what he calls moral vertigo. We're walking around using the exact same words. Justice, rights, freedom, harm, but we mean completely different things by them. We aren't disagreeing within a shared framework anymore. We're disagreeing about the framework itself.
It's like, we're sitting down to play a board game, but I'm playing chess and you're playing Monopoly, and we're just getting furious at each other because the moves don't make any sense.
That's it, exactly. And the expert analysis here, the part that really matters for actual laws and policies, is that if we cannot agree on what a human being fundamentally is, we cannot sustain human rights.
Because the foundation is gone.
Right. If human is just a biological category, but personhood is something you have to earn through autonomy, through being self-aware and capable of choice, well, then some humans simply aren't persons.
And that is a terrifying door to open. We have opened that door a few times in history before, and it literally never goes well.
Never. It always ends in atrocity.
Okay, so we have the theory down. Dignity versus autonomy. But I want to see how this actually breaks things in the real world. Because Thornberry is very clear that this isn't just an abstract philosophical debate. It is hollowing out our day-to-day society. Let's talk about the first major symptom he identifies, the loneliness epidemic.
This is one of the most poignant parts of the entire book. We all know people are lonely. We see the statistics all the time. But we usually blame social media or the fact that everyone is working 80 hours a week. Thornberry says no. Loneliness is the inevitable mathematical result of radical autonomy.
Connect the dots for me there. How does being radically free make me lonely?
Think about the logic of it. If your absolute highest value is independence, if your life goal is to never be a burden, to never be told what to do, to be completely self-sufficient, then you have to cut ties.
Because relationships are tying you down.
Exactly. Relationships are inherently dependent. They are messy. They require deep compromise. They require you to submit your own will to someone else's needs on a daily basis.
Right. Being married, having kids, caring for a sick parent, those are all massive infringements on my personal autonomy.
They are autonomy killers. So if autonomy is your god, you will eventually sacrifice those relationships on its altar. You will view any kind of dependence as a personal failure.
The privatization of dependence, that was the phrase he used in that chapter.
Yes. We used to think of dependence as just a normal, beautiful part of the human life cycle. You were born completely dependent, you get old and become dependent again, and somewhere in between you get sick or have bad luck and need help.
It was just a given.
Right. But now we view dependence as a failure of planning. So we retreat. We hire professionals to care for us instead of relying on our family or community. We isolate ourselves so we don't bother anyone.
And families themselves change fundamentally under this view. He calls modern families voluntary associations.
This is a massive shift. It's the shift from a covenant to a contract.
Oh, that's a sharp distinction.
It is. A covenant says, I am bound to you no matter what happens. Sickness, health, poverty. A contract says, I am bound to you only as long as this arrangement is mutually beneficial and continues to fulfill my need for self-expression.
Which basically puts every relationship you have on a rolling performance review. Like, are you still making me happy? No. Okay, I'm canceling the subscription.
And you simply cannot build a stable, enduring life on that foundation. This is exactly where the demographic collapse comes into play. And this is a really sensitive topic right now, talking about why people aren't having kids.
It is sensitive. The birth rate is plummeting basically everywhere in the West. We're falling way below the replacement level, which is 2.1 children per woman. And usually when I read articles about this, it's all focused on economics. Housing is too expensive. Daycare costs a fortune.
And Thornberry absolutely acknowledges that. He's not saying the economic pressure isn't real, but he points out that if you look at the raw data, even in incredibly wealthy countries with massive state-funded childcare subsidies like the Scandinavian countries, birth rates are still crashing.
So it's not just the money holding people back.
No, it's anthropological. It's about how we view the actual point of life.
Under the old dignity framework, how were children viewed?
They were viewed as participants in a shared destiny. They were the literal future of the lineage, the family, the community. You had them because that's how the story continues. But under radical autonomy, a child gets reframed as an optional lifestyle accessory.
Man, that phrase really stings.
Yeah.
Optional lifestyle accessory. It makes it sound like buying a purebred dog or deciding to get a boat.
It sounds incredibly harsh, but look at how we talk about parenting today. We talk about it as a project. Does this fit my life plan right now? Am I ready to give up my personal freedom? Am I financially optimized for this?
Right.
If the self is the absolute center of the universe, a child is a massive gravitational disruption to that universe.
It's the ultimate disruption. It's 18 years, or really the rest of your life, of constantly putting someone else's immediate needs above your own desires. That is fundamentally anti-autonomous.
It is, and here is the expert analysis on why this matters at a civilizational level. A society that prioritizes the autonomous, now, my current comfort, my current travel plans, my current career trajectory, completely loses the will to secure the generational future.
We are literally failing to reproduce our own civilization because we're just so hyper-focused on the self.
Yes. And meanwhile, the institutions that are supposed to hold society together while all this is happening, schools, courts, hospitals, they are completely paralyzed.
Paralyzed by neutrality, he says.
Right. They don't want to impose values on anyone because that would violate autonomy, so they try to stay totally neutral. But Thornberry points out, and this is a key insight, there is actually no such thing as neutrality.
Neutrality is a myth.
Neutrality is a vacuum. And when you create a vacuum in public life, something is going to rush in to fill it. In our case, what rushes in is the logic of the free market and the logic of radical autonomy. It smuggles in a new anthropology entirely.
Can you give me a tangible example of what that looks like, say, in a courtroom?
Sure. Just look at the battles happening right now over parental rights versus child autonomy in medical decisions. We're seeing this heavily with gender care, but also with other psychological or medical issues. The courts are really struggling.
How do they use to handle it?
They used to rely on a strong legal presumption that parents act in the best interest of the child and that the family is a cohesive unit. But now, the individual is seen as the primary unit of society. So the court looks at the situation and asks, who is the autonomous agent here?
Oh, I see.
If the child can claim any level of autonomy or self-expression, the parents are increasingly pushed aside. The state steps in, supposedly as a neutral party, to protect the autonomy of the child against the values of the family.
So it basically dissolves the family as a meaningful political unit and just leaves a bunch of isolated individuals floating around, all being managed directly by the state.
Exactly. And that leads us right into the deepest, darkest water of this entire deep dive. Segment 3. We have to talk about life at the extreme margins. Because Thornberry makes a great point. If you want to test a theory, if you want to know if a bridge is actually strong, you don't test it by driving a bicycle over it.
You drive a fully loaded semi-truck over it. You test it at its maximum stress point.
Exactly. And the maximum stress points of humanity are the very beginning of life and the very end of life, the unborn and the dying.
Let's start with the unborn. Thornberry calls this the autonomy trap. What is the setup here?
Here is the trap. If personhood, meaning your actual moral worth and right to exist, depends on your capacity for autonomy, meaning can you think? Can you choose? Are you self-aware?
Right.
If that's the criteria, then the unborn clearly do not qualify.
Obviously. Yeah. A fetus, or honestly even a newborn baby for that matter, isn't writing poetry or making complex investment decisions.
Exactly. So under the autonomy framework, they have zero inherent rights. Their worth becomes entirely conditional. And specifically, it becomes conditional on the desire of the autonomous person carrying them.
This is what he calls the Schrodinger's baby problem.
It is. Thornberry uses this incredibly stark comparison to illustrate the incoherence of this. Imagine a hospital waiting room. 2 women are sitting there. Both are exactly 20 weeks pregnant. Physiologically, biologically, the entities inside them are absolutely identical. Same exact stage of development, same heartbeat, same brain activity.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Woman A desperately wants the baby. She's already named him. She's painting the nursery. If she suddenly loses that baby, it is a profound tragedy. It is mourned as a death in the family. The doctors will do everything in their power to save, quote unquote, the patient.
Right. The hospital treats it as 2 patients.
Exactly. Now, woman B does not want the baby. She views the pregnancy as an impediment to her autonomy and her life plans. To her, it is not a son. It is tissue. It is a clump of cells that needs to be removed.
And under our current legal and moral framework in the West, both of those women are considered right.
That is the exact incoherence Thornberry is pointing out. How can the fundamental nature of a human being depend entirely on the feelings of another human being?
It's like metaphysical magic.
It really is. It's essentially saying that my personal desire has the godlike power to bestow personhood on an entity or to completely strip it away.
Which, if you think about it, basically turns the unborn into property.
Worse than property, really.
Yeah.
It turns them into a pure projection of our own will. Thornberry argues that dignity has to be based on nature, on reality. What is the thing in front of us? If it is a living human organism, if there is biological continuity, then it possesses inherent dignity, period.
So whether it is wanted or unwanted or disabled or a genius, none of that changes what it fundamentally is.
Right. And the practical implication here isn't just about the abortion debate. It radically changes how we approach things like prenatal screening.
Yes, I wanted to bring that up. This is where the consumer mindset really starts to creep into medicine.
Heavily. We use screening technology now not just to prepare for a medical issue, but to select. The autonomy argument essentially says, I have a right to a child that fits my specific life plan. A disabled child does not fit my life plan. Therefore, I have the right to eliminate the disabled child.
It literally frames the child as a product that needs to pass quality control before delivery.
And if we jump all the way to the other end of life, we see the exact same logic playing out, just in reverse. The rapid expansion of medical aid in dying made.
This has moved incredibly fast. I remember just a few years ago when it's being pitched to the public, the argument was always, this is only for people who have maybe 2 weeks to live and are in agonizing, untreatable pain.
The slippery slope argument is very often dismissed as a logical fallacy in debates, but in this specific case, Thornberry brings the receipts. It is a fully documented historical progression. Just look at Canada as the prime example.
Right. They've been at the forefront of this.
Bill C-14 originally allowed it only for quote-unquote foreseeable death. You had to be terminal. Then came Bill C-7 just a few years later. Suddenly, your death no longer has to be foreseeable. You just need to be experiencing intolerable suffering. And importantly, that can now include physical disability.
And now they're actively debating expanding it to mental illness.
Mental illness, poverty, and loneliness. There was a specific case study in the book that really highlighted this. The elderly woman. Did that one stick with you?
Oh, man. It did. It was absolutely heartbreaking. This woman was not terminally ill at all. She was just done.
Right.
She was isolated. Her friends had mostly passed away. Her family was distant and busy. She felt like she was just taking up space and being a burden to the healthcare system. And so she formally requested death.
Now, I want you to apply the two frameworks to her situation. The autonomy framework looks at her and says, she is an autonomous, rational agent. She is making a clear choice about her own body. Who are we to stand in the way of her freedom? It is her ultimate right to die on her own terms.
It dresses the whole thing up in the language of respect, like we're respecting your decision.
Exactly. But the dignity framework looks at that exact same woman and sees a catastrophic failure of civilization. It says her desire to die is not freedom. It is a symptom of our collective abandonment of her. She doesn't actually want to be dead. She wants to stop being lonely. She wants to stop feeling like a burden to a society that values independence above all else.
So by handing her the lethal drugs and signing the paperwork, we aren't respecting her freedom at all. We are validating her worst fear. We are agreeing with her that her life has lost its value.
That is what Thornberry calls the dignity threshold. He argues that a truly just society must look at her and say, no, you are still one of us. Your value has not dropped a single ounce just because your economic utility has dropped. In fact, because you are vulnerable, our obligation to care for you actually increases.
That is such a powerful, radical shift in perspective. The more vulnerable you are, the more you are owed by society. Autonomy says the exact opposite. The more vulnerable you are, the less agency you have, so the less you matter.
That is the fundamental civilizational clash we are in right now. And honestly, nowhere is this clash more sci-fi and more genuinely terrifying than in the realm of modern technology. Segment 4. The marketplace of bodies.
This is where we get into the real Brave New World stuff. But it's not some distant dystopian future. It is happening today.
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry today. Let's talk about reproductive technologies. IVF, genetic selection. Thornberry frames this entire industry as a shift from a gift to a project.
Can you explain that distinction? Gift versus project.
A gift is something you receive with a sense of gratitude. You don't get to choose it. It arrives, it's a surprise, and your job is to welcome it and care for it. A project, on the other hand, is something you actively design, execute, and control from start to finish. When you move human reproduction out of the bedroom and into the laboratory, you inevitably introduce market dynamics.
And the golden rule of the market is that the customer is always right.
And the customer always wants the best possible product for their money. We are seeing this right now with embryo selection. A couple goes into a clinic, they create 12 embryos in a dish. Then they run advanced genetic testing on all of them. They get a literal scorecard back.
It's like looking at a catalog.
It is. The doctor says, well, embryo 1 has a high risk of early onset diabetes. Embryo 4 has a 20% higher chance of having blue eyes and falls into a higher IQ potential bracket.
And obviously they pick the winner.
They pick the winner, and they discard or freeze the losers. This is the ultimate triumph of radical autonomy. I am using my resources to personally curate my offspring, but the massive danger here, as Thornberry warns, is that our noble desire to quote-unquote prevent disability subtly quietly morphs into preventing disabled persons from ever existing.
We aren't developing a cure for a disease. We are just deleting the carrier of the disease.
Exactly. And then you add commercial surrogacy into the mix. This topic was actually very personal for Thornberry, wasn't it?
Yeah, he mentioned his cousin in the book, Brian Yeton.
Right. His cousin Brian was actually a co-founder of a company called Miracle Surrogacy down in Mexico. So Thornberry isn't just speaking from theory here. He has seen the actual contracts. He has looked at the catalogs of women.
What is the core moral issue with surrogacy from the dignity perspective? Because I think a lot of people just see it as a beautiful way to help someone who can't have a family.
And the desire for a family is a beautiful thing. But the moral issue is the direct commodification of the human body and the resulting child. It literally turns the woman's womb into a factory floor. It becomes rental space. And it turns the resulting child into a contractual deliverable.
A deliverable. That word implies a transaction.
It is a pure transaction. And what happens in a transaction when the deliverable is damaged? There are absolute horror stories, documented legal cases of intended parents rejecting a surrogate's baby because it was born with Down syndrome or even just a severe cleft lip. They tell the agency, this isn't what we ordered, we aren't taking delivery, and we aren't paying the final installment.
That is just horrific. The baby is just left in limbo.
It is horrific. But if you follow the logic of radical autonomy, it makes perfect sense. If I'm paying $100,000 for a service and a product, I expect strict quality control. The dignity argument cuts right through all that market logic and says human beings and human bodies can never, ever be used as instruments.
They are ends in themselves.
Yes, you cannot buy a person. You cannot rent a person's biological functions. It violates their inherent standing.
And this logic extends perfectly to what he calls the new eugenics, things like gene editing and CRISPR.
This is the absolute frontier we are standing on. Thornberry says we have to draw a hard line between therapy and enhancement.
Therapy being healing someone who is sick.
Right. Curing sickle cell anemia using gene editing is therapy. That serves dignity. Enhancement is designing a better person from scratch. And the market is pushing incredibly hard toward enhancement. Polygenic embryo scoring for traits completely unrelated to disease.
This terrifies me because it's the exact point where societal inequality actually becomes biological.
Yes. Think about it. If the rich can afford to literally design smarter, healthier, taller, more disease-resistant children, and the poor have to rely on natural random reproduction, we aren't just talking about a wealth gap anymore.
No.
We are talking about a literal speciation event. Two different classes of humans.
A biological caste system written directly into our DNA.
And here is the absolute kicker that Thornberry points out. Autonomy cannot stop this from happening.
Because it's a choice.
Exactly.
Right.
If a parent stands up and says, look, it is my choice, I have the money, I want to give my child the absolute best start in life, who are you to tell me I can't edit their genes? Autonomy has absolutely no intellectual defense against that. It just has to nod and say, well, okay, it's your truth and your choice.
Wow. Only the dignity framework has the brakes to stop the train.
Only dignity provides the moral guardrails to stand up and say, no, this fundamentally violates human equality. You are treating a human being as raw material to be optimized for your own satisfaction.
Okay. We have officially stared deep into the abyss today. We've seen the loneliness, the discarding of the weak, the literal commodification of children. It's incredibly heavy, but we promised the listener a ladder out of the hole. Segment 5 is the alternative. How do we actually build a dignity-centered society from here?
It starts with rebuilding the anthropology. We have to collectively answer the question, what is a human, differently? And Thornberry lays out 5 pillars to build on.
Let's run through those pillars, because if we are going to push back against this unmaking, we need a solid platform to stand on. What's pillar 1?
Pillar 1 is universality. Worth is held by all humans, without a single exception. No more drawing lines between a human and a person. If you belong to the human species, you are in the club.
Got it. Pillar 2 is equality.
And this one is far more radical than it sounds. It means human worth is not distributed on a bell curve. Albert Einstein and a newborn baby with severe brain damage possess the exact same amount of dignity.
That is an incredibly countercultural statement in a society entirely built on merit and achievement.
It is. It challenges everything about how we value people. They have vastly different capabilities, yes, but entirely equal worth. Pillar 3 is inviolability. Humans must never be treated merely as a means to an end. You cannot use someone.
Pillar 4 is dependency affirming. And this one feels like the direct antidote to the loneliness epidemic we talked about earlier.
It is the cure. We have to completely stop viewing dependency as a failure or a glitch in the system. We have to embrace it as a core feature of human life. We need each other, and that is a good thing.
And the final one, Pillar 5, obligations corresponding to rights.
If you possess a right, I possess a corresponding duty. We are deeply connected in a web of mutual obligation. Rights aren't just shields we hold up to keep people away. They are bridges between us.
So how do we actually apply these pillars? I want to get practical here. You mentioned disability ethics early in your notes. How does the vulnerability principle actually work in everyday life?
This might actually be my favorite concept in the entire book. Remember the autonomy logic. It says, the more vulnerable you are, meaning the less agency and power you have, the less you matter to the system. The vulnerability principle flips that completely upside down. It says the more vulnerable the human being is, the stronger the moral obligation is on the rest of us to protect them.
Give me a real-world case example of how that changes things.
Take a nonverbal young man living in a long-term care facility. He can't vote. He can't work a job. He can't express his truth on the internet. Radical autonomy looks at him, sees a total lack of agency, and quietly asks, is this a life really worth living?
And how does dignity look at him?
Dignity looks at that same young man and sees a profoundly relational being. He is actively calling us to love him. His very inability to claim his own rights means our duty to uphold them is absolute. Under the vulnerability principle, he is actually the VIP of the moral community. He teaches us how to care.
That changes absolutely everything about how you walk into a nursing home. It changes how you look at a homeless person on the street.
It reorients your entire vision. And regarding actual legislative policy, Thornberry has a very specific list of directions.
Let's hear them. What about end-of-life care?
We have to shift the public focus completely away from the right to die and toward the right to non-abandonment.
The right to non-abandonment. What does that actually look like in a hospital or a budget?
It means we spend the money, we massively invest in palliative care, advanced pain management, deep social support networks. We design a system so that no one ever chooses death simply because they are afraid of medical bankruptcy or dying alone in a silent room. We have to remove the societal push factors.
What about policies regarding reproduction?
He argues for a complete ban on commercial surrogacy. And by the way, it is already banned in many parts of Europe. The U.S. is actually a Wild West outlier on this issue. We also need strict restrictions on embryo selection for non-medical traits. We have to ensure that biotechnology serves the human person rather than serving the free market.
And for the family, how do we rebuild that?
We need structural policies that formally recognize the family as a foundational moral institution, not just an optional lifestyle choice. Tax codes, housing policies, workplace flexibility, everything should be designed to make it easier for people to be dependent on each other.
So make it financially viable to care for an aging parent in your own home instead of outsourcing it.
Exactly. Make it easier for a family to afford to have that second or third child without facing financial ruin.
It sounds like we essentially need to rebuild the village we burned down.
You do, but you cannot build a functional village on the foundation of leave me alone to live my truth. You have to build it on the foundation of I am my brother's keeper.
Which brings us to the grand conclusion here. Segment 6, the civilizational crossroads. Because ultimately, this isn't just about personal ethics. This is deeply political.
It is the most political issue there is. Thornberry argues that a healthy democracy isn't just a mechanical system for counting votes, it is a shared moral community. It requires what he calls civic muscle.
Civic muscle, meaning a sense of duty, a willingness to sacrifice.
Right, the ability to totally lose a political argument, but still wake up the next day and love your neighbor.
And radical autonomy actively corrodes that muscle.
It dissolves it entirely. Autonomy creates a society of isolated little atoms just bouncing off each other. If I fundamentally only care about my rights and my subjective truth, why on earth should I sacrifice anything for you? Why should I agree to pay taxes for your kid's public school? Why should I fight in a war to defend you?
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't. So we are staring down two distinct paths.
Path one.
Path one is radical autonomy. If we stay on this road, it leads to continued demographic collapse. We literally just stop showing up for the future. It leads to the rapid erosion of our trusted institutions, and ultimately, it leads to the strong simply ruling over the weak.
Because if there is no inherent dignity protecting the weak, then might makes right.
Exactly. The loudest, richest, most powerful autonomous agents will dictate the terms of reality.
And path two.
Path two is inherent dignity. Now, this path is significantly harder. It demands a lot more of us. It requires us to actively care for people we might not have naturally chosen to be around. But it leads to intergenerational continuity. It provides an ironclad protection for the most vulnerable among us. It creates what he calls stable liberty.
I want to end our discussion today exactly where the book begins, with that really moving story in the preface, the one about the prison chaplain.
Yes, Chaplain George Barrett Glover. Thornberry was doing research, visiting a Florida Department of Corrections facility, a maximum security prison. You can just imagine the sensory details of the scene: cinder block walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, the overwhelming smell of institutional cleaner. It is a place specifically designed to warehouse the people that society desperately wants to forget.
The ultimate discarded people.
Exactly. And while he's there, he meets this chaplain, Glover, a man who has spent basically his entire adult life working inside that grim place. And Thornberry admits he expected to find a guy filled with cynicism or just complete burnout.
Right, you'd assume he'd be hardened by it all.
But instead, he found this man who possessed this fierce, absolute burning belief in the irreducible worth of every single man wearing a prison jumpsuit.
And Glover asked Thornberry a question that set the whole book in motion.
He did. They were talking, and Glover looked Thornberry right in the eyes and asked, "What does the human being mean? And do you understand what is actually at stake if we get that question wrong?"
Do you understand what is at stake if we get that question wrong?
Man, that is the ultimate question that haunts every single page of this book. And the answer, as we've seen today, is clearly everything. Literally everything is at stake. If we get the fundamental definition of human wrong, no other law, no other piece of technology, no other political progress will matter at all. The foundation will just give way.
It really forces you to take a long, hard look in the mirror. It forces you to look differently at your kids, your aging parents, your annoying neighbors.
And here is the final provocative thought that Thornberry leaves the reader with, and that we want to leave everyone listening with today. A civilization that chooses to protect only the autonomous, only the strong, the smart, the highly independent, will eventually cease to protect anyone at all.
And why is that the inevitable outcome?
Because eventually, every single one of us will lose our autonomy. You are going to age. You are going to get sick. You might get into a terrible accident tomorrow. Your sharp mind might eventually start to slip. If human dignity is purely tied to your capacity for autonomy, then your worth has a built-in expiration date.
So the real question you have to ask yourself is your worth something you have to constantly earn and maintain through your performance, your hustle, your perfect authenticity? Or is it something you simply are?
Because if it's something you have to earn, you can absolutely lose it. But if it's something you inherently are, you are eternally safe.
And that, my friends, is a thought deeply worth sitting with this week. That concludes our deep dive into Bones of Being. It is a tough, challenging set of ideas, but clearly a necessary one for the times we live in. We really hope it sparks some new conversations for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for going on this heavy journey with us.
We will see you all on the next deep dive. Stay curious, and please, take care of each other out there.
Good.